Today I'm going to redo my medieval fire making class from Springwell. We had a bit of interest there, and some people have requested that we redo it on video so that those who couldn't make it to the event can be included in spreading that knowledge around and just having it as a future reference. So what I'm going to attempt to do here today is make a fire using medieval technology and have a bit of a discussion about what that entails and some mentalities around when we're building a campfire and making fire in as modern day reenactors. And what we can bring with us and then harvest from the landscape so that we can affect fire in a authentic way. The technology that we're using today is fire and steel. So we've got your steel and you've got your fire. So unlike modern fire steels that are called a fire steel, which is these objects here, you see these a lot on camping survival shows, Alone, if you ever watched that, that's what they commonly call a fire steel. So in these, it's a mixture of iron and magnesium. And so fundamentally it works the same as the traditional fire steel, but these run a lot hotter. So the sparks that these throw out when you have a sharp edge pulling material off of the side of the rod, the sparks that it's throwing out are coming off there at about 1200 degrees. And so it's much more generous in its spark, and it's much more generous in the energy that it throws out. And so the small amount of iron particles that are in there, as they get ripped off and hit the atmosphere, they hit oxygen, they spontaneously combust, and that then ignites the magnesium, and you get quite a aggressive spark. When we take a step back to an early technology, we have the fire steel. That's a high carbon iron in here, and then we're hitting it with our sharp edge. In this particular case is a piece of flint. This is a piece of flint from England. We recently researched they're formed by silica particles from little jiggly creatures getting crushed in the same way that a diamond gets formed from carbon being crushed. So that's a piece of English flint. They only grow where chalk is prevalent. In Australia recently we were actually able to find this piece of chert, which is a similar material but just slightly different in its formation from this one that was actually found on Merriweather Beach. And it has the same thing because of its Rockwell hardness. It's able to tear microscopic amounts of steel off of the fire steel that then spontaneously combust, and we can then light a fire with that. But the amount of iron, the temperature coming off these is about 600 degrees, so a much lower energy than what we're getting with the ferrocerium rod. Everyone has heard about the fire triangle. So you have your fuel, oxygen, and ignition. The way to think about ignition is more accurate to say it's energy. So in your triangle you have energy in, oxygen and fuel to create a chemical reaction, a sustained chemical reaction where we're bonding mainly carbon molecules with oxygen that then lets off heat and energy when it's with the spare electrodes that's in there. But in order to get the wood hot enough so that those carbon molecules are coming off into a gas, then you need to have enough energy going in to the reaction for it to sustain itself and for it to cascade upward. In our going even more modern, so your big lighter, exactly the same concept. You have a liquid fuel. You press the button, it becomes a gas fuel. There's a tiny little ferro rod in there the scraper throws sparks into the lighter, you get sustained fire. We're basically doing that, but in a much more manually. Big lighters are sort of like magical inventions that no one really thinks about, but there's a lot of very intelligent design that's gone into them. So, because we're starting at such a low energy point with our spark hitting our iron and flicking a single spark down, the fuel that it's going to land on has to be very forgiving and very ready to ignite. In bushcraft and more modern camping, when people play with this stuff, they often use this material. It's called char cloth. So it's a piece of fabric that has been burnt in the present without oxygen, so removing one of the elements of the triangle, where it's been superheated but not being allowed to burn, and so it's been left with a carbon membrane, like a matrix of carbon. So they're super fine carbon molecules. But through our research in medieval times, especially getting back into Dark Ages reenactment, which I do a lot of, that charring process to get this nice char cloth only really works with cottons. You can't really do it with linen; it disintegrates, and you end up with a very fine little powder. So we've been moving towards experimenting with things like punkwoods and other sources of carbon. It's basically a piece of charcoal, but to make sure that it's ready to have a spark, we deliberately char a material that's very light and aerated and has a lot of surface area, so that when a spark hits it, it then can make a nice little ember for us that we can transfer into starting our tinder bundle. Once we get the spark into the char, we're then transferring that up the sizes of material till we can get up to burning something substantially thick. Thinking about that energy in concept, if I had a blowtorch that's just dumping energy into the reaction, I can just immediately burn these sticks, that long, and it would catch. But because we're starting so small and then working up, we have to incrementally step up as we go. So we're starting from like a microscopic carbon tubes going into something that's as fine as a feather, like a hair, and then you're stepping into something as thick as kind of pins, and then going to pencils, and going to stuff that's about as thick as your thumb, and then rolling through. So as I've been collecting a little bit of burning material this morning, just wandering around our garden, I've collected some sticks and I've busted them up with my hands and then made little piles of a roughly the same size material, so I know what goes on first, and then stepping up through different sizes. When we're a little bit of an aside, when we're harvesting timber from the environment for our campfires, it's very tempting to get ourselves a cutting tool, like an axe. So we've got we get these axes, and then we go, great, well, I need some wood for my fire, so I'm going to start with a massive big log, and then bust it down and bust it down and bust it down, and make this scale of timber. But the vast majority of the times you really don't need to be doing that. If there's sticks floating around, and there usually is, and if you're only doing a little cooking fire and you're not settling in for a week where you need like a huge big bonfire, busting the big logs down into kindling, you're sort of just wearing yourself out, wearing your tools out, and you're better off just finding what nature has already given us. You can just see there the difference in the axes there. So one's quite thick, so that'd be okay for splitting, and one's quite thin, so that's more of for cutting, taking off limbs and something like this. So have going for a bushwalk with something like this, and so just it'll just knock off little stuff like that all day. But if I had to pick one item for my fire making kit to carry with me, a little saw like this will cut things, even up as big as your wrist. It'll saw stuff like that all day, and it weighs nothing, and it's pretty safe. You just going around sawing stuff off. Because we're doing medieval fire making, so the idea is that as a medieval person who needs to make a fire, we're not really thinking about it as like a survival mentality. It's not as if we're being dropped in the wilderness. I just have to, I'm allowed to bring stuff with me. And people who, all throughout history, people have workshops, they have industries that are producing byproducts, so, and finding this little stuff. So like if they're doing flax manufacturing, there's going to be a lot of flax around. If they're doing straw, there's going to be lots of fibrous material. Straw is sort of a bad fire maker. It burns kind of quick, and it burns smoky, and then it sort of smothers your fire. And so I tried not to use straw too much because it's sort of just a headache. But like if it's what you got, it's what you got. But the what I have in my fire making kit is this my little bag, and as I go, I just pack little bits of fibre in it as I get. So as you do a lot of camping, you end up with a lot of this sort of rope off-cut, so any of this natural fibre. This stuff is basically like tailor-made for making fire bundles. It's just ready to rock. Every time you have to deal with the dag end of a bit of rope, you just hang on to it, and then you end up, sooner or later, you just end up with a big bundle. Even if you just buy a little string like that, and then you can just untwist it, bust it down into your fibres, and that's going to get you your hair-like material that is going to be very conducive for dropping a piece of char in. Because we're working with these natural fibres, they tend to burn quick, and if it burns out faster than it can get your bigger material lit, the reaction stalls. You're not walking up through those bigger pieces. You then have to start again, and it really is. A lot of this stuff can be made from the fire. So getting more of this charcoal, I need the fire to get more of it. It's much better to overkill it once than it is to try to do it and then it fails and do it and it fails, and you're eating material each time you do that. So more the merrier, and then just get it up, get it going, and then deal with finding more material later. The material that we bring from home that's optimal, we want to be a little bit sparing with that and use as much found material as we can, because we can always find more material where we are, but we can't necessarily run back home to get more of the man-made stuff. To get fibre straight out of the environment that requires a little bit of handling, you're looking at things like, so this is just a piece of bark off of a gum tree probably, and these inner barks, so these long fibrous materials, you just spending a bit of time, maybe using a knife, and just peeling off long little fibres and busting them down until you have a ball. Your tinder bundle generally wants to be about as big as a baseball or a tennis ball, something quite substantial, and then we can drop a spark into. The only other things that can massively help you out with your fire making is accelerants. So what we think about in accelerants is things like fats, and so in this little pot here, I have a pot of lard. Lard is basically nature's napalm. It goes great, but accelerant probably isn't the best way to think about it, because it's not accelerating your reaction necessarily. What it's doing is it's providing an additional fuel source that's like it's a liquid fuel that is then melting, and then it's burning as a gas again. But the problem is, because it's a liquid, if your fire isn't substantially underway, once it starts to melt, you can get into drowning it, and so that's removing oxygen again, and that extinguishes it. So beeswax is good, but beeswax has quite a high, compared to say like a lard, it has quite a high melting temperature and quite a high ignition temperature. So you often find a beeswax candle is a bit dribbly, because you almost need to burn it like in like a lamp as opposed to just straight out the candle, because the wax comes away and melts, and it takes quite a bit. Or if you think about trying to burn something like olive oil, it's quite a high ignition. There's quite a lot of energy in to get that ignition going. A great thing that we find in nature that has that accelerant property, or that liquid fuel, is what's called fat wood. So this is wood from a pine tree, from where the branches of the pine branch out. All that sap cools down in the fork of the tree, and so you bust that off and you harvest it, and this is very sap rich. You can see it's translucent, and is full of sap. So we can pare this down, lots of fine little particles, and it will basically work like an actual firelighter. A modern firelighter has the same principles as, so using like a fat, but it's got a hydrocarbon that's been embedded in like a paraffin wax or something, so that it's just all in one go. Yeah, so that's theory. Let's see if we can get into doing a little bit of processing, and then see if I can get a fire lit. So the first thing I'm going to do is grab some of our bundle here. I'm going to pull it all apart. Oh, actually, the first thing I'm going to do, we had a question yesterday about making char material if you don't have a container. And so the easy answer to that is, what I'm going to do here is actually dig a little hole in my hearth and bury some timber in there, so that as the fire burns up and around it, it will char without the presence of oxygen, and then we'll get some nice char material that we can do our fire with next time. Back and bury it down. Make sure we don't get too much coal there, because I don't want that to burn. Yeah, they're a little bit damp today, but what I'll do is I'll start on I will drop my sparks onto a board that will then give me a nice dry surface to work from. So taking a little bit of rope, just pull it apart again, pull it apart again, pull it apart some more. Just end up with a big, chaotic, hairy dreadlock. If I'm getting to the stage where I'm cold and it's raining and I've got one bit of material that I've got to drop one spark on to, otherwise I'm going to freeze to death, at that point I've basically already stuffed up and I should have been more prepared. This isn't really a Bear Grylls type deal. If you need a fire in a hurry and immediately, this isn't the avenue that I'm going, but for the academic interest of it, you can do this fairly reliably. If waterproofing your tinderbox is probably going to be one of your challenges. If this stuff gets wet, it's a long road to get it dried back out again before you can drop a spark into it again. Alright, so we'll use some of this cat's tail, because I have it. Not cat's tail. My sister might be able to tell me what type of grass this is.
It's pampas grass. Pampas grass.
Pampas grass. Is it Australian native?
I think it's a weed.
Even better. Stuff out of the way. I'll just tip all that onto the board. more surface area, the better. What I'm also going to do is prep a little bit of lard. Just to chuck on there and see if we can help things along. When it's going, I'll demonstrate a bit of the fat wood as well. So holding the flint, I'm looking for a sharp edge, and I'm going to do a few taps with my just a kind of a flicking motion, and I'll move it in to eventually start hitting the steel. If you're hitting the rock and nothing's happening, you kind of flip the rock until you find a better angle. Shin's done it. Move that over the edge of the board. Give me a bit more of a runway. So what I did there was I actually put one of the pieces of a chart in my thumb, so that the sparks bouncing off of the stone had a chance to hit it at the feathery part, and now we have an ember lit. So now I'm going to try to get it a bit more lit before we move over to the bundle. To the large piece. Might be able to just pop it in. The hot air rises, so as I blow, I'm going to blow up. Nice and gentle, giving it plenty of time to happen. Char in there, just to see if we can keep that ember, transfer the ember around and keep it burning. No real rush at this point, sort of going. It hasn't done the classic like explode into flame yet, but you can see there's plenty of smoke and plenty of heat there. The extra bit of char that I chucked in there did burn, caught fire, so that gave us a little extra time. if we keep blowing on it too aggressively, we actually, when you blow out a birthday candle, you're not actually depriving it of oxygen, because obviously you're pumping lots and lots of oxygen into it. So what we're doing when we blow on a birthday candle, we're actually removing the energy from the equation. We're cooling it down rapidly. We're also physically removing the flame from where the fuel is, and so we're removing on a triangle. So when you're blowing on a piece of tinder, if you're blowing too hard, while yes, it's getting really aggressive, it's not heating up the fuel around it, and it starts to lag. And so you get that like really, really hot ember, and then you take your breath away, and then it sort of dies down. And then, so you can see there, the lard is starting to burn. And so when I said it's not really an accelerant, it's more of a liquid fuel that the dry material is wicking up and then burning it away. So it'll actually burn. It'll sustain your reaction there with the dry material before it gets to completely destroying the dry stuff. And now the light is actually just burning straight on the plank and burning like exactly like a fire lighter. But now as we go forward and stack on more timber, we're going to be aware of what's called the Venturi effect. And so as this area up here is hot, it then draws more oxygen up, or not oxygen, more air. As it circulates the air, it is creating a vacuum up top and then drawing air through. So we actually want our fire to we want the air to pull through the fire, not just off the sides of it. So we're just stacking our sticks, allowing for enough air, enough space, and then not creating a sort of a dead air zone in the middle of the fire. We want to keep stacking the timber over where we want to stack the kindling over where the tinder is actually burning. So then the energy coming off of the smaller stuff then warms up the big stuff enough so that it can catch, and then on and on and on until eventually we're burning logs the size of houses. It's hissing now because it's a little bit dry day, so it's pulling the moisture out of the timber and drying it out. And so when you're starting a fire in the damp, you have to be aware that you have enough energy going in so that it can actually evaporate any moisture existing in the fuel. There we go. Well, we're going quite nicely there. A little bit of housekeeping just to save all this stuff. We didn't use nearly any of that. We used one bit of timber. There's probably still another 10 fires worth of char there. Back in a sec. So fatwood, so this stuff, the reason why this is so magical is because once it's lit, it will actually burn under its own steam. So see, we're burning there now. It's bubbling and sizzling, so that's the sap that's burning. That's the sap contained within the wood that's just burning off. I'll split it. I also, talking about avoiding busting into timber with your axe, I tend to avoid trying to split timber with a knife. It just, like, you can do it, it's just, you're sort of making your tools for them. It smells wonderful. Pine makes not a great timber for lighting. No, it makes a great timber for lighting fires. It doesn't make a great timber for cooking over because of the sap and the extra volatiles that are in it. It tends to leave a sooty residue on all your cookware, and it leaves a lot of soot and residue inside of your fireplace. Yeah, that's You can buy it at Bunnings in a big bag, but you can also just harvest it. You've got the pine trees around. Once you can spot it. I got a big bunch of it out of pallets the other day. Once you sort of know what it looks like, you can just bust it out and it's dry. It'll burn. I'll save that one. Any of this leftover charcoal as well can be put on to dry out and will eventually reignite. Anything I haven't answered? We're starting to die out a little bit because I haven't been very diligent about stacking the kindling onto it. Take the camera off, turn the camera off, we'll take a few photos later on to see if we pull that out. The end.